And a couple of months ago, I got a call from the Tulsi Gabbard people. They weren't a campaign yet. They were just kind of people. And they said, Tulsi Gabbard is interested in coming to see some student veterans. And the reason they contacted me is because one of the departments I oversee is the GI Bill office at the University of Iowa. So the students that come to get their GI Bill benefits come through our office, and we make sure that the VA owns up to their end of the bargain and get them through school. So I thought, wow, here's a politician actually caring about veterans, and they want to come and speak to our student veterans and get some concerns about what they're going through. So that impressed me right away. So then I started doing a little research on Tulsi, because I remembered her from the Democratic National Convention in 2016 where I went. I was impressed by her there. But I found out that she has like a ton of experience. Like, why hadn't I heard of this young lady before? First of all, she was a city council person in Honolulu. And I'm also a former city council member too. So one of the things that I have found about the politicians that I meet are the ones that were involved in local politics, like Tulsi. Really, they get it. They get it at a very rudimentary level that a lot of these national politicians don't get, because they've had to deal with issues whereby if they didn't get it solved, they were going to run into so-and-so at the grocery store and they were going to hear about it, right? So she gets that at a very early level. She is also a veteran, as you may have known. She went to the Iraq War. I was in a little bit of an older war, as you can see by my gray hairs, but we also went through Iraq. And she racked up a couple of medals. She's been given the Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Accommodation Medal, and the Army Achievement Medal. I don't have any of those. Not that I didn't deserve them, but I don't have any of them. She also got her bachelor's degree in Commerce and Business Administration at Hawaii Pacific University. First of all, if I went to Hawaii Pacific University, I would have graduated. I'd still be out on the beach. And so I give her credit for like getting through that institution the way she did. She's been in Congress since 2013, and what she's talking about, there are two areas for me that really attract me to her candidacy. First of all, she knows the cost of war, not just the economic cost that it all costs us, but the human cost. And I see this every day in my job when I get veterans coming in, that I know there's a pretty good chance they're not going to make it. She understands that. And we need a politician who's not afraid to say it the way it is and not be afraid to be criticized for saying it. So I give her kudos for that. And the other important issue that I think Tulsi is willing to address that not many politicians are, certainly not in the DNC, is getting the corporate money out of our politics. And I honestly feel that that is one of the biggest threats to the democracy in our country right now, is corporate money in politics. We got to get rid of it. Now, I know you don't want to hear me talk all day, so I'm not going to make you wait any longer. It is my honor to introduce to you the Honorable Tulsi Gabbard from the state of Hawaii.
Service and leadership. I want to say thanks to Royce here for hosting us at the Carpenters Union, and for the leadership that you provide, not only for your members, but in the community as a whole. Thanks to your team who's here as well. Is that Steve and Tony in the back?
Tony.
Good to see you again, Steve. Thank you. And I want to say thanks to our volunteers, Harold and Nick. There we go. It takes a lot of hands to be able to put these gatherings together, so I appreciate all of your hard work. and want to thank all of you for taking the time to come out. Allow me the opportunity to introduce myself to you, to share some of my thoughts and views and plans on different issues that we face, and why I'm offering to serve you as president, and what I hope to do for you in that role. I look forward to answering your questions after as well. Really what we begin with is the state of affairs that we are facing in this country today. Why is it that we have taken time on an afternoon during a weekday to come and gather in a place like this? It's because we care. It's because we care very much for each other, for our communities, for our families, and for our country, for our future. And we know in our heart of hearts that the only way that we can bring about real change, the only way that we can bring about the kind of sea change that we need to see in this country, starting at the very top, but at every level of leadership, is when we the people stand together and stand united, speaking with one voice for the people and for our planet. Unfortunately, we have too many people in Washington especially, whether they are self-serving politicians or greedy special interests and corporations, who are trying to drive us apart, who are trying to pit one group of us against the other, fomenting fears and bigotry and hatred for their own gain, whether it be political gain or monetary gain or more ratings in the media. We cannot allow that to happen. We cannot allow that darkness to consume us. I am often inspired by and reminded of Dr. King's wise words that were so relevant when he spoke them and are so relevant for us today, especially as we face these tough and difficult and dark times, especially as we are challenged, especially as we see sometimes these obstacles that lie before us can seem too great. Whether it is, as David said, the big money, the big corporate interests that kind of pervade our politics today, or other obstacles that are placed before us. Dr. King reminds us that darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. That hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. So even as sometimes we see ourselves surrounded by this hate, by this darkness, by this greed, Dr. King reminds us to be that light, to be inspired by that love that we have for each other and for our country, to stand together with strength to overcome those obstacles, because we know that when we do that, that there is no obstacle we cannot overcome. That's a fact. And history has shown us time and again when we have made these great changes in our country, they have come about only because we the people have stood up and made it happen. And that's the great challenge that's before us today. That is the great challenge that's before us today, because we see on all of the different frustrations and challenges and drivers of suffering and pain and hardship in our lives, in our families' lives, in our communities. They're all driven back to this corruption of spirit that puts selfish interests before the interests of the people. It's all driven back to the reality that we face, that we do not have a government that embodies the vision that our founders had for us. We do not have a government that is truly of the people, by the people, and for the people. Instead, almost every day, whether you're reading a news story or you're hearing from a friend, we see example after example of how our government is largely made up of powerful, by the powerful, and for the powerful. Of the special interest, by the special interest, and for the special interest. And this impacts us in both small and large ways. This is the kind of movement that we need to build to change this paradigm of power, to put the power back into the hands of the people, and to make sure that our government is truly representative of us. that our leaders are hearing our voices. And that is being manifested through the kinds of policies that we are seeing enacted, where people are being put before profits. People are being put before politics. Where our people and our planet are being put at the forefront of all the conversations that we're having about the policies and the changes that we need to see. So, whether we're talking about issues like healthcare, we know healthcare is something that impacts us all. This is something that is deeply concerning. That in order for us to change this paradigm where right now we're in a situation where our healthcare system is driven by for-profit insurance companies and for-profit pharmaceutical companies who literally are profiting on our backs, on the backs of sick people in this country. Leaving us in a place where if you don't have enough money in your pocket, exactly. Exactly. You will get left behind. You're not able to get the care that you need. All across this country, I have heard stories. I heard from someone just earlier today about their daughter who has severe disabilities. And because of the privatization of Medicaid that has happened here in Iowa, she has lost much of her care. She no longer has a dentist. She's now figuring out how to pay $3,000 out of pocket every single month for her care. So when we talk about passing Medicare for all, these are the people who we're talking about. We're talking about every single one of us. And setting that standard and that expectation that no matter who we are or how much money is in our pockets, anyone who needs care will be able to get it without discrimination. Seems like a no-brainer, right? Seems like a no-brainer. There's a lot of work in education, information that we need to do in order to bring about this change, but we're already seeing so much progress. We're already seeing so much progress as more and more people in this country recognize that this lack of ability to get the care that we need does not discriminate by party lines or political ideology. This is about taking care of every single one of us as Americans. When we look at different issues like clean water and clean air, you know, I've been hearing a lot since I've been here about how the big multinational agriculture corporations are poisoning your water here in Iowa in many different ways. How is it that we live in this country and we still have to be concerned about toxic water, about being poisoned by water? The numbers of waterways here in Iowa that have been poisoned. I heard from someone who said there are signs saying, don't let your dog jump into the river or the stream. Right? Yeah. So, as we talk about this twisted sense of priorities where corporate interests are being placed ahead of the interests of our people, we are talking about our very lives. We are talking about the water that we drink. We're talking about the air that we breathe, the water that we bathe in. These open spaces and the places that we get to call home. These are not partisan issues. These are issues that affect every single one of us and those we love and our future. So there's a whole host of issues we can talk about. Criminal justice reform, ending the federal marijuana prohibition, fighting for a living wage, continuing this fight for 15 across this country, investing in infrastructure, investing in a green, renewable economy, taking this climate crisis head on and making the kinds of changes we need to see, both with our energy and agriculture and the choices that we make every day to protect our environment, and to build relationships with other countries to address this crisis that are built on cooperation rather than conflict. Recognizing that even if we do all that we must right now, to deal with climate change, it still won't be enough. It requires us to work together on this planet that we share in order to take this challenge head on. These are all the things that we need to do, and there's an issue that's central to the rest that must be addressed in order to do so. I see a lot of Veterans for Peace buttons here, and I'm so happy to see that because you've been very active on this issue. Because as veterans who have seen the cost of war, we are most often the ones fighting hardest for peace because we know the cost of war. And we know who pays the price. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Hawaii. I'm still in the National Guard now. I'm 16 years in the Army National Guard. I am currently serving as a major, served on 2 deployments to the Middle East, and in Congress have served on the Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committees for 6 years. And so have seen the foreign policy establishment and the military-industrial complex in Washington, and the drivers of these continued regime change wars, and have seen as a soldier firsthand the cost of war and who pays the price. Just a couple of weeks ago, I was in Hawaii to see off a unit that I deployed with. The unit I deployed with during my 2nd deployment, they're going off again, this time being deployed to Afghanistan. So they'll be away from their families for about 400 days. There were a number of soldiers there in that unit that I served with. There were a number of younger soldiers who've never been deployed before. But a lot of the folks that I deployed with, for them, this was their 3rd or 4th or 5th deployment. As I talked to them and asked them how they were doing, how they were feeling, how are their families and their kids, many of them said, this is my last trip. I can't do this anymore. I can't do this to my family. And as we know, these are soldiers. They are trained, and they have volunteered to put their lives on the line for our country, and will not hesitate to do so, to defend the people of this country.
It's not for our country. It's for the rich.
Let me finish. They are not thinking of themselves. They are thinking of their families. They are thinking of their fellow soldiers. They are thinking of our country. And as I talked to them, they were talking about how tough it has been on their spouses and on their children to see them go off once again. And I told one of them, I said, please be safe and come back home. He said, I know, I will. I made a promise to my wife. I made a promise to my wife. But we have all, those who I served with, we have lost some of our own in our previous deployments. They're going into this clear-eyed, and it was very hard for me to be there and to say goodbye and to give them hugs as they walked up the steps on the plane, knowing that I couldn't go with them. But as I shared with them, they are who I'm fighting for. It is them. It is our troops who continue to be deployed to countries around the world, countries where we have no business sending our troops, on missions that do not serve our interests in this country, nor do they serve the interests of the people in the countries where we are waging these regime change wars. They are why I'm running for president. They are why I'm asking you to allow me to serve you as Commander-in-Chief. Because they know I have their back. I have your back. And I will end these regime change wars. Get our troops home. End this new Cold War and this nuclear arms race that is escalating and posing an existential threat to us all. And all of this costing us trillions of dollars. Dollars that are being taken out of every one of our pockets in this room. Dollars that are taken out of every one of our pockets. Dollars that are not going to making sure that we have health care for all. Dollars that are not going to investing in rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure. Dollars that are not going into making sure that every single one of us has clean water to drink. Dollars that are not going towards making sure that we have teachers who are getting paid well, special education teachers who are taking care of our kids, dollars that are not going to making sure that we are actually caring for our veterans, caring for those who have sacrificed so much when they lay that uniform down. Just providing the care and the benefits that they've earned, that you have earned. It is unacceptable that still, as we sit here today, we see the veteran suicide rates continuing to rise. We see this lack of basic access to mental health services to help those who are still struggling, who survived the rigors of war and are coming home and losing the battle here at home. We just saw news the other day of a veteran who took his own life while sitting in the VA waiting room in front of a whole bunch of people.
How many do we lose a day? 22.
Average is 22. And this is impacting veterans across generations. Veterans who served during different conflicts and different wars. This is the problem, is that we have found ourselves in this place as a country, as veterans, as Americans, because our leaders have failed us. Because they're putting their own interests, or the interests of corporations, or the interests of other countries before the interests of our own country and the American people. And we continue to suffer as a result. So this is the change that I seek to bring, but this kind of change cannot be done by one person. It requires us all standing united, motivated by this love that we have for each other and for our country, to bend the arc of history away from war and towards peace. Overcoming those vested interests in the foreign policy establishment and the military-industrial complex and the money that they make by these continued regime change wars, this nuclear arms race that we are in now. We can and we must take action to overcome those obstacles, to change the course of our country, so that we can ensure that we have a safe, secure, peaceful future, not only for us today, but for generations to come. This is the change that I seek to bring about, to bring to the White House, bring to the presidency these values that are at the heart of every single service member and veteran, to put service above self, to put people ahead of politics, people ahead of profits, and so that we can truly bring about this vision that our founders had for us, with a government and a White House that is dedicated and solely focused on fulfilling that mission of service to the people of this country. So I ask for your consideration. I ask for you to join me in this movement to bring about this change. Our lives depend on it and our future depends on it. Thank you very much.
Why don't you talk about the mercenary military system and the oil wars as opposed to regime change? Because like in Egypt, we've managed to sequester that regime and keep it there. And who knows what we're doing in Iran.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. If
Yes.
you look at the regime change wars that we have waged in the past,
Yes.
and the ones that we are continuing to wage today, and we see in Venezuela and Iran, both. These are two regime change efforts that are happening right now before our very eyes. This administration has made no attempt to cover up what's driving. John Bolton said very specifically in Venezuela, it's about American oil companies getting access to their oil. We know what this is about in Iran. And the reality is that we all have to acknowledge and speak the truth about is that this is not something that originated with the Trump administration. That these regime change efforts are being applauded, with the war drums being beaten by leaders from both political parties. So when we talk about the corporate interests, We talk about the greed that is driving these wars that cost all of us so much, that cause so much suffering, so much devastation. This is exactly what we're talking about. And as you rightly point out, this is not about something that happened before that we have to learn from. Yes, we have to learn from it, but it is something that is happening right now, today. That unless we act, we will continue. We will continue to see our country being led down that destructive path, undermining our national security, undermining our economy, leaving our people and our veterans behind, what to speak of the suffering that's being caused in these other countries. The interests that are pushing this are so deeply entrenched in Washington. You know this. The only way we can bring about that change is if we the people choose to speak about this truth, to hold leaders accountable, and to make this change. Because unless we address this cost of war, unless we address our foreign policy, then we will not have the resources that we need to serve the urgent needs of our people and our communities all across this country.
Ma'am, first of all, let me say, I treated the VA here, and I have exceptional care.
That's great.
That's great. I have a buddy who was in Vietnam and was subject to Agent Orange.
Yes.
We killed something like 500,000 Vietnamese with it. We poisoned all of our troops. He now is battling cancer because of the damn stuff. Not only is it affecting him, but I just read that it may affect his heirs for the next 5 generations. We also, for you folks who went through the other wars with the burn pits,
That's right.
have what they call burn pit lung. But not everybody gets to say that they were even exposed to it, so consequently, they're not going to get treated for it because there's no way to make them be accountable for it. I don't know what you can do about it, Major, but we have to do something. We owe it to those folks who went out. We went to stupid wars. There's no doubt about that. We have to do something about it.
What's your name?
Harold.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you for raising this question. It's one that strikes close to home for obvious reasons. There, like your friend, was a constituent of mine in Hawaii who lived on the Big Island, Vietnam veteran, Agent Orange exposure, cancer, riddled with cancer that he for too long was not able to get treatment for because it was denied. Well, there's no proof you were exposed to Agent Orange. There's no proof that even if you were exposed that is the reason why you have this cancer. Yet it has taken the lives of so many Vietnam veterans. I spoke to Paul on the phone. I was in Washington and was connected to him through his wife and a friend about 2 days before he passed away. And he could barely speak at that point. He spoke with a whisper. And he shared his own story about the struggles that he has had through this system and this bureaucracy that denied him the care that he earned. But his last words to me was, promise me that you will continue to fight for our other veterans so they don't have to go through what I've been through.
Wow.
And he passed away a couple of days later. So in Congress, as you rightly said, now our generation of veterans is facing the Agent Orange of the post 9/11 generation with exposure to these toxic burn pits. Our exposure has not been documented, but anyone who has been deployed in this generation of veterans knows that whether you were in a large camp or a small camp, you were exposed. You breathe those toxic fumes every single day in your camp. For us, we were on one of the larger camps, which meant there was a lot more stuff that was being burned, and everything everything was burned. Everything. From chemicals to waste and plastics, all kinds of stuff, paints, everything. Everything went into the burn pit. We had soldiers whose daily duty was assigned to pulling security around the burn pit. Literally. We had guard towers that were stationed right around those burn pits. We had a constant cloud of fumes that hung over our camp. Were you there?
Yes, Senator. I was in Afghanistan myself, 2004, 2005. We had a burn pit. I made several trips out to it myself. There is a VA burn pit registry, isn't there?
There is a V. Are you in there? Have you registered?
Yes, Senator. Yes, ma'am. And I just thought, I'm not saying it's a perfect system, but I thought that there is at least something, some kind of registry for that. And I'm not trying to take away anything from anybody who's exposed to Agent Orange. I've got friends who were,
Yeah.
but that were in Vietnam, much older than me myself, obviously. But there is a burn pit registry from the VA, is there not?
There is a burn pit registry.
And I'm on it.
That's good.
Yes, ma'am.
When we look, and I don't know what the total numbers are right now, but there have been over 1 million service members deployed since 9/11
Yes, ma'am.
to Iraq, Afghanistan, the Middle East as a whole. But right now in the registry, I believe there are under 200,000 service members who are registered. So we
Okay.
still see that there is a huge gap of service members whose names are not being captured even through this registry, which is an important first step. It's important that the registry is there. We've introduced legislation to strengthen that registry and to further push that accountability to make sure that every single service member is accounted for. The harder battle that we are fighting right now is getting the VA to recognize that the burn pit lung or the other respiratory illnesses that our brothers and sisters are either sick or dying from right now, and they are dying. The VA is not directly connecting those illnesses with that burn pit exposure.
Very interested.
And so we have spouses and loved ones and family members who are coming to Capitol Hill and who are mobilizing and speaking for those who have already passed on and for those who are sick now. And this is an urgent thing within the VA and frankly within the DoD, because the DoD still has not banned the use of burn pits
That's right.
for troops that are deployed. So we're trying to tackle this on both fronts in Congress. Right now I'm on the Armed Services Committee and we're looking at introducing amendments and legislation to deal with the DoD side of things. But trust me, as President and Commander-in-Chief, this is the experience that I bring and the voices that we bring for so many who have served. And I will make this happen. I will make sure that we don't leave anyone behind.
I just had another question. It'd take a while, though. Maybe could I ask you afterwards?
Okay, sounds good. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, I'm really glad you talked about the military and our inappropriate wars all over the planet. And as you know, as we all probably know, the U.S. military is one of the greatest contributors to climate change. And I was glad to hear you mention climate change. However, you mentioned it in passing, and I'm hoping that you will find a way and inspiration to bring it to the top of your list, because as you know, the International Panel on Climate Change says we have less than 12 years to turn this around. 80% of the American public now knows it's real and agrees that we're causing it. The Pentagon knows it's our greatest threat to national security. And we need our candidates to put it on the top of their talk list so that everybody knows this is what we have to deal with, and we have to deal with it now, and we have to deal with it fast, and we have to deal with it first. And we can do the other stuff, but we got to do this. Thank you. I asked another candidate who was here whether on her first day as president she would declare national emergency around the climate issue, because it is an existential emergency. And she said no. What do you say?
Well, first let me address your first question. There's a reason, I don't disagree with you about the urgency of this threat that we're facing from climate change. there's a reason why I talk about the cost of war. Because unless we address where the trillions of dollars that are coming out of our pockets are currently going, we won't have the resources to make the kind of bold, aggressive investments in renewable energy, in a green, renewable economy that we need to make. Investments in our infrastructure, investments in our energy infrastructure, addressing how great our agriculture system currently contributes to this climate change crisis that we're facing. We also cannot address the fact that as long as we continue to have this mentality, especially as we see with this administration, in how they're relating to other countries, it's a zero-sum mentality, saying in order for the United States to win, then these other countries must lose. That attitude is getting in the way of our ability to work with countries like China, for example, recognizing that even if we do everything that we need to do right now, unless we work with other countries to address this climate crisis, we're not going to get to where we need to be as quickly as we need to get there. So the reason why I talk about the cost of war is because unless we make this change, unless we create this peace dividend, then we won't have what we need to make the kinds of changes and investments that we need in climate change, to address climate change. Look, there are a number of pieces of legislation. There's one that I authored last year and we're working on reintroducing in Congress called the Off Fossil Fuels Act that takes a very aggressive approach to ending our addiction on fossil fuels completely and transitioning to clean, renewable energy, investing in our workforce, those who will be impacted by making this change, and investing in our communities. These are the kinds of things that we need to pursue. We also have to be cognizant of what I talked about reprioritizing our resources. I'd have to think about the national emergency question. I think it's really important for our country's sake that Congress come together and recognize this crisis for what it is and prioritize our resources towards addressing that.
Which is exactly why I wanted to hear you talk about it.
Sure. Yeah,
Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thanks. Yes.
I'm Lexi, and I'm an ACLU Rights for All voter. I'm wondering if and how you would dismantle the Muslim ban.
By ending it.
Very good.
Do I have to say more? No. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Sort of following up on the Agent Orange and on Miriam's question,
Yeah.
the Green New Deal has a resonance, and I hope that you're doing just fine in terms of saying if you don't address cost of war, none of these other things the good things are going to wind up happening unless we readjust our priorities. I guess, and I hope that you're able to use that as political leverage in your run for presidency. You know, that not only is that right, but it is it's the political advantageous thing to do. But I guess my question is, with other progressives proposing the Green New Deal, it seems like out of that they don't address how it can be paid for by a reduction in military spending, and they don't address the military's contribution to our environmental disasters. It would be a great thing for your campaign if you could, with the principal proponents of the quote Green New Deal, of just give them a 5-minute logic visit about that, so that they could make that part of this. We don't need progressives in the Congress to be divided. And if you could wind up pushing that and touting you're pushing that, I think it would be great. I don't know, that's,
No, it's a
that's
good
not
point.
that's not a question, but.
No, thank you, it's a good point, and I will just, I'm gonna counter and make the case to you, to all of you, because you should not discount the power of your voices and your ability to shift the conversation and how we are approaching these serious issues that we are tackling. So it is a huge problem that you've pointed out. It is a huge problem that you're not hearing from very many, if any, other leaders in Washington about this central issue, the cost of war, and how we need to create this peace dividend to address and invest in the needs that we have right here, the needs of our people. Why is that, and how does that change? That changes by people like you, by people like us. I've been raising these issues for years in Washington, but ultimately, what your elected leaders will, who your elected leaders will listen to most is you. And we look at how the conversations have shifted on a whole host of issues, including healthcare, including climate change. That hasn't happened just because of one person in Washington. That's happened because we, the people, have recognized and made it a priority to hold leaders accountable and to ask these kinds of questions, to raise the issue so that they become central to the conversation. So that's really the way that we need to bring this about in the conversations that we're having in our communities and with our friends and in our own sphere of influence. I'm doing my part. I'm doing what I can. This is something that collectively we need to do, and that's why I bring this issue up everywhere I go, all across this country, because we need to recognize how central it is to everything else. And we need to recognize something else, I mentioned it earlier, something else that no one is talking about, which is this existential threat that we are facing with the reality that we are closer to a nuclear catastrophe now than ever before in history. So if we want to talk about a threat to our future and our very existence, it is the fact that we are in a new Cold War with increasing tensions between the United States and Russia and China, nuclear-armed countries. And we're in this nuclear arms race with Trump withdrawing from the INF treaty rather than strengthening and expanding it. Trump withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, undermining the ability to make progress in a peaceful agreement to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula. Unless we deal with this existential threat that we face that puts us minutes away from complete annihilation. That's the reality that we're facing. This is something that we got a wake-up call about a year ago in Hawaii, too. And we got that message. I think some of you have heard me talk about that message that came across our cell phones. Over 1 million phones in Hawaii saying, missile incoming, seek shelter immediately, this is not a drill. So what we're talking about is not just a theory or a possibility somewhere else. What we're talking about, as we went through in January of last year, is getting a message saying you have minutes to live. Seek shelter. Where do you seek shelter? Where can you go? Where can you go that'll keep you safe from a nuclear missile heading your way? Nowhere. Nowhere. That's what we found. We had kids on our college campus sprinting, trying to get to a concrete building. And they thought, well, maybe they would be safe in there. A father who lowered his little girl down a manhole, thinking that, well, at least she may be safe. And that alarm turned out to be false, but we reacted in the way that we did because we know that this threat is real. So these issues are central to our existence and to our future, and they must be addressed. That's why I'm running for president, because I don't want any one of you or your loved ones, your family, your friends, to have to go through what we went through. We don't have to live this way. It doesn't have to be this way. But it will require us to stand up and to bring about this change, to walk away from this nuclear abyss that we are facing right now. And instead of spending more of our money on these nuclear weapons and this nuclear arms race, stop. Work on getting rid of these nuclear weapons and take those dollars and use them to protect our environment, to deal with climate change, to make sure that we've got health care for all, to deal with these urgent and pressing needs that we have.
Last question.
You identified some of the issues. I guess you started with the Martin Luther King code that we cannot drive darkness by darkness.
Yeah.
So I think we need to talk about alternative to our military spending. And President Carter yesterday published that President Trump called him last Saturday and he asked him what to do with China. And China is building the One Road, One Belt initiative. And they have been building for the last 40 years, and we've been fighting for the last 40 years. And we've been creating enemies, and they've been creating friends around the globe. And can we talk about building a spice road instead of a Silk Road from India to the Middle East to Europe and the West? Can we talk about what is Netanyahu is talking about? He said that he wants to annex the West Bank. I mean, what kind of friends do we have in the Middle East, and what kind of leadership? They wanted us to fight the Iraq war, we did. They want us now to fight the Iran war, are we going to? So what is your views about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and it's in the big picture of our alternatives to rebuild the Middle East instead of after it's been destroyed now?
Yeah. Thank you, Newman. I think at the core of all of the examples that you're talking about has to do with, as I mentioned, changing this fossilized 20th century mentality that we either win or lose. That if they win, we lose. If we win, they lose. When that's not in our interests, it's not in the interests of peace, and it's not reality. That we have to be able to put ourselves in their shoes. We have to understand where these other countries are coming from. We have to be willing to have those engagements, to build those relationships that are based on cooperation, that recognize the mutual shared interests of peace and prosperity. And not only look at how we're approaching China, but as you said, across the Middle East, questioning and challenging our relationships with other countries, those who have been called allies for a very long time. And you didn't mention Saudi Arabia, but I know we've talked about this many times before. And we have seen how this administration, especially recently, and especially now as they're beating their war drums to go to war with Iran, as Secretary Pompeo, who is the Secretary of State, is responsible for pursuing diplomatic paths, is basically saying, well, you know, Article 2 gives the president broad powers, implying that this president can do what he likes with our military with Iran. The dangers that we face are serious. And yes, what this administration is doing is making these problems worse. You mentioned Netanyahu. Same thing, that Trump has been using his position, putting politics before the interests of our people to try to help Netanyahu get elected. The announcement that he made about the Golan Heights, without regard for how that kind of statement makes it harder and harder for any prospect of peace. And it increases tensions. United States, Israel, Syria, Russia, Iran, and what the disastrous consequences could be that will come from that. What this all boils down to is leaders who are short-sighted. Leaders who are putting politics ahead of us. Putting their own selfish interests, their own short-term gain, ahead of the interests of the people and peace and our future. That's the change that I will bring. The experience that I have, both as a soldier, as someone who's deployed twice to the Middle East, someone who served in Congress on the Foreign Affairs and Armed Services Committees, to bring to this most important responsibility that the President has as Commander-in-Chief. To exercise that judgment, understanding the consequences to the actions and decisions that we take, and how critical it is, how important it is that we work on building these relationships with other countries, how it serves our interests as the American people and the interests of these other countries, that we have far more in common that we care for than we have different. This is essential. It is essential for our future. It is essential for us to make sure that we have a country that is walking down a path towards a bright future with opportunity and respect and justice and equality for all people. Thank you all so much for
We're going to have press come up for a quick 5-minute press avail, and then she'd love to meet and greet some of you if you'd like to stick around.
Everybody in the room, Newman is announcing